Starting with the Thanksgiving scripture readings, Job 23, verses 1 to 9 and 16 to 17. Then Job answered, "Today also my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his dwelling. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would learn what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his powers? No, but he would give heed to me. There an upright person could reason with him, and I should be acquitted forever by my judge. If I go forward, he is not there, or backward, I cannot perceive him. On the left he hides, I cannot go behind him. I turn to the right, but I cannot see him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. If I could only vanish in darkness, and thick darkness would cover my face." And the psalm I'm choosing for today is the 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell on the house of the Lord my whole life long." The title of today's reflection is God is Grateful for You. This is my first face-to-face sermon since COVID hit, since we were closed down with worship services over a year ago. Being in church again really feels good. I can't think of a better place to be back in church than this particular congregation. Your church has so much going for it. You can take pride in being part of your church. Your history is one that is incredible. I generally use the Revised Common Lectionary readings when I'm speaking. I notice the readings for today are not quite the same as they are for the Canadian Thanksgiving Day. And for some reason, today's readings resonated more for me and I thought might fit better. One of the readings comes from Job. One of my Bible commentaries refers to Job as being widely recognized, even in secular circles, as one of the most magnificent dramatic poems. The drama of the book of Job seems appropriate for the experience of a drama-filled pandemic. In the book of Job, we see two very distinct Job characters. There's the patient Job, and there's the impatient Job. And Job goes through life's distresses seemingly quite patient. And we also have the impatient Job. I think the impatient Job, in my mind, shows up when Job is looking for answers. He proclaims his innocence for his mistakes that could have caused the calamities in his life, curses the day he's born, and becomes frustrated with life in general. We see both the patient and the impatient in our COVID response. In the early stages of the pandemic, we were pretty patient, In some cities, people applauded when physicians and nurses got off work. Then it morphed into the impatient people, challenging the expertise of physicians and medical scientists, not wanting to wear masks, protesting against masks and vaccinations, and demanding our human rights. One of the books in my library is the Global Bible Commentary. I like the book because it gives insights from Christian scholars who live outside of Europe and North America. The commentary for Job indicates that Job's friends lacked information about Job's suffering. Benjamin Netre, I hope I'm saying his name right, who wrote the Job commentary, indicates the book of Job can address issues such as lack of knowledge regarding poverty and the spread of HIV/AIDS in the sub-region of Africa. He explains how changes in Western African tradition resulting from colonization led to a reduction in traditional life values and lifestyles, contributing to the spread of HIV and AIDS in Western African cities. As Africans were dispossessed from their lands by large commercial interests, they became underpaid employees of companies. With increasing urbanization in Africa, traditional sexual norms declined. The decline in traditional values in rural Africa helped contribute to the spread of HIV/AIDS. As I think of one factor in African suffering, my mind turns to the pandemic. We traditionally have accepted the word of doctors, medical scientists, and experts. Somehow through the pandemic, the authority of medical science declined. The spread of COVID might have been contributed to by competing views of COVID and how it's transmitted and the impact of COVID on people's lives and long-term health and how to protect the economic interests of a country during a pandemic. Perhaps in some way, thinking about Job can help us as we celebrate a Christmas that comes to us, a Thanksgiving that comes to us during a time of pandemic. For several years, I had the privilege of giving Christmas Day worship services. The people who came to the service were people who were often visiting family in the region or had no family, had no place to be. Some of the people came to church so they wouldn't feel alone all day. I believe it was important to briefly acknowledge the challenges of the season before we could talk about the meanings of Christmas. I don't think the world is seen as rough a period of time as what we've gone through the last year and a half or so, in probably somewhere between 70 and 100 years. I appreciate Thanksgiving, and I think the need to appreciate Thanksgiving is a need that can only be satisfied as we reflect on the calamities of the last year and a half. I think we first started seeing COVID cases in Alberta in January of 2020. At my church, the church I attend, we've missed the following face-to-face celebrations: one Christmas, 2 Easters, 2 Pride Church services, numerous birthdays, a few memorial services, and 2 Thanksgivings because we're still meeting virtually this Thanksgiving. Some of the problems we faced during the time churches were closed include the following: brush fires in Australia, California, British Columbia, polarizing elections in both the United States and Canada. We discovered hundreds of unmarked graves of Indigenous children at former boarding schools that taught Indigenous children. That traumatized and triggered many Indigenous people. We joined the world in horror as we watched George Floyd being killed while in police custody. I watched with a lot of emotion the protests coming from Portland, Oregon, the protests in support of Black lives and the value of Black lives. Portland moms came out to stand between the police and the protesters to ensure there would be no violence. Later, they were joined by Portland dads who came out with their battery-powered leaf blowers and blew the tear gas back on the police. We observed anger and hate against Asian people on the increase. Hate crimes targeting Vancouver, British Columbia, and Asians increased by 717% in the year 2020. Collectively, this is a challenging Thanksgiving. We are celebrating Thanksgiving in the presence of profound loss. In Canada, we lost 27,819 people to the pandemic. The picture for our American friends is more serious. The September 29 statistics indicate 694,701 people died from COVID-19 in the United States. At times, we felt threatened and overwhelmed by things that we might not have viewed as our enemies during normal times. And what things felt like our enemies in the last year? COVID, isolation, loneliness, grief, fear of disease, fear of loss of freedom, of so much more. Political elections, other political views, health concerns, troubling medical diagnoses. The book of Esther is an interesting book in the Bible. It doesn't mention prayer or God. The book of Esther takes place after a disaster. I'm not sure if that's the reason why God and prayer are not mentioned in the book of Esther, because they are displaced and enslaved by war. The children of Israel, at least many of them, were living in Persia. We're in a disaster of the COVID pandemic. And during times of personal pain that can blot out the word God from our daily lives and prayer and the narratives of our hearts and lives, the story of Queen Esther, the story of Purim, speaks to us. Rabbi Manis Friedman, as he reflects on the meaning of the story of Queen Esther, says the story of Purim notes this: God became real enough that we don't have to refer to him to know that he's there. He is a real achievement. God has become real to us. Our relationship has gotten stronger after the destruction, not before. We can be thankful not just for the things that God gives us, the provisions that God gives us. We can be thankful for the presence of God. The sense that God is with us during challenging and frightening times is in the 23rd Psalm. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. The psalmist is trying to give us the feeling that God is present even when our enemies are so close that they can watch us eat. You prepare a table for me before my enemies. And those enemies can include illnesses and pandemics. Stephen Furtick is a best-selling author, an award-winning musician, and a minister. He's a senior minister at Evolution Church. Stephen Furtick makes the point that we can learn to read our enemies as a sign that it's time to eat. And I'm going to add that the sight of enemies may be a sign that it's supper time, a time to eat the meal that God has prepared for us. And a meal of gratitude is part of what God has prepared for us. You might be thinking, but I don't feel grateful. That's okay. God is bringing gratitude to us. God is grateful for you. And God is grateful to be in a relationship with you. Perhaps that's what Thanksgiving has always been